You're listening to a 58 Ember production.
GIRLSCAMP, it's Girls Camp.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Girls Camp podcast. I'm your host, Haley Rawle, and if you're navigating a faith deconstruction too, or simply fascinated by faith deconstruction journeys, by religion generally, and Mormonism specifically, then you are in the right place. Pull up a camp chair. I'm very much resisting the urge to say, I can't believe it's November, but I really can't believe it's November. Time is flying by, and I feel like things are just moving so quickly. And I think that's just the universal experience of adulthood. So I should probably stop talking about it in every intro, but maybe next time. It is the first Wednesday of the month, which means it is a Campfire Chat Wednesday. I'm doing things a little differently. I had the urge to mix it up, and we are actually talking about the scariest things you said or did when you were Mormon or religious. And let me just say, you all did not disappoint with this prompt. We have all said or done many things when we were Mormon or maybe religious that haunt us. So hopefully this will be a cathartic experience to get some of those out there and work through some of the guilt around these things together. I thought that this prompt was appropriate as we're coming off of spooky season and moving into Thanksgiving, gratitude, all that jazz. I wasn't quite ready to give up on the spooky haunted things, and so I felt like this was kind of a good bridge between seasons, if you will. I have personally been reflecting on the scariest things that I said or did as a Mormon, and unfortunately, there are many of them, and as I was reading through all of your submissions, I kept remembering more of them. I'm going to share a few of mine off the top, and then we'll interweave even more as I'm reading your write-ins. The first thing that haunts me deeply, I used to work at the MTC. I was an MTC teacher, but I specifically taught the senior missionaries. So if you don't know, you can go back out on a mission when you are, I don't know the exact age limit. I'm guessing over 60. You can sign up to go on a mission with your partner. When I was on a mission in Germany, there were a bunch of senior missionary couples that had chosen to come to Germany. You get to choose at that point. You also have to pay for it. So you pay you have to pay for a mission anyway, but you pay based on where you're going. You just basically have to pay for your own lodging and living expenses. And you do a mission. It's not really the proselytizing door-to-door mission that younger missionaries do. Oftentimes, the senior missionaries are in charge of family history or things like that. It's not as rigorous. You can talk to family more, but it's still a Mormon mission. And when I got home from my mission, I wanted to teach at the MTC because I was all in, but I don't remember if I applied to be a German missionary teacher to teach the younger missionaries or if I just went straight for the senior missionaries. I think I went straight for the senior missionaries because I heard it was less rigorous. So I ended up teaching the senior missionaries, and I did loads of things that I regret as an MTC teacher, especially to these sweet senior missionaries. I remember just feeling like it was my job to really teach them how to be a missionary, and instead of just encouraging them to be themselves, I really was focused on, you need to learn the lessons, you need to do this a specific way, and I just wish that I didn't do that and just encourage them to spread love and kindness and be themselves. That said, there's one specific instance that really, really haunts me. And it wasn't even a huge deal, but I remember I was teaching a group of senior missionaries. There was about, I think, 4 couples, so 8 missionaries in the room, all over 60. And we would do a lot of role plays. That was a big part of the missionary curriculum, is you would actually role play teaching lessons, and someone would pretend to be an investigator, someone learning the gospel, and the missionaries would teach them. We were going to role play, what if you're standing in line at a grocery store and you're wearing your missionary name tag and someone in line says, "Oh, I see you're wearing a name tag. Are you Mormon?" And then they ask you, well, I've heard some things about Joseph Smith that don't sound great. And then I asked the room, how would you respond? And I remember a sweet sister missionary said, oh, I think I would start telling them about, Joseph Smith this and Joseph Smith that. And I said, actually, you shouldn't address their question about Joseph Smith. What you should do is you should say, we actually have a book called the Book of Mormon that we can give you and you can read and pray about it. And if God tells you it's true, then everything hinges on the Book of Mormon and you'll be able to find out through the Spirit that Joseph Smith is a prophet. And I think the reason I regret that so much and it haunts me so much is because, I don't know, it just seems kind of rude and condescending that I said that to a woman much wiser than me who just thought, oh, I'll just talk to them about Joseph Smith, which wasn't a bad thing to do anyway. And B, just because I was obviously so engrossed in this messaging of lead them back to the Book of Mormon, ask them to pray about the Book of Mormon. If the Book of Mormon is true, everything else is true. And I was just hammering that into their minds. And it's just icky in retrospect because that's not a real human interaction. And I had obviously just bought in wholesale to the church's narrative around forget any concerns people may have about the founding prophet, for example, and just get them to read the Book of Mormon and pray about it, which it's really valid if someone's heard something about Joseph Smith and wants to talk about that. And so that's one of the things that haunts me. Another thing that haunts me is from my mission. We've got a lot of submissions about missions. Submissions about missions. Submission mission. I think that is because if you served a mission as a Mormon, that is sort of peak level of indoctrination, peak level of Mormon control. And so I think it got us all probably to say and do things that now in retrospect we regret. And these are even things I regretted when I was still a Mormon, but no longer a missionary, because I was just in such a weird frame of mind. The thing that I regret particularly about being a missionary is we couldn't count a lesson, because as a missionary, you're encouraged to get a certain amount of lessons, a certain amount of new people to teach, and you're keeping track of all of these things. And there's a lot of pride, or at least I had a lot of pride in those numbers, just the sheer numbers of people I was teaching and baptizing, etc. And in order to count an interaction with someone who was learning about the church as a lesson, you had to say a prayer. That was one of the metrics. And so there were a few times I can remember where we were talking to someone on the street, they were listening to us, and we were teaching them a principle of the gospel. And then I asked them on the street in public if we could say a prayer together. And it was because I wanted to count that interaction as a lesson. Now that I'm recounting this, I'm feeling even ickier and more embarrassed because it wasn't, thinking the best of myself at the time, maybe I thought, oh, we'll feel the Spirit by praying together. And maybe I thought that was my primary motivation. But I think I know that really in my heart, I just wanted to count that as a lesson, which is so goddamn silly in retrospect to think that that would even matter, and to push a public prayer on someone, which is really uncomfortable and kind of inappropriate, in order to be able to tell my zone leader missionary that I got that lesson because I wanted to impress them and stroke my own missionary ego. It's very gross. The last thing that haunts me that I will share before we dive into the submissions is a time that my mother likes to remind me of, even still, which is right before I went on my mission. I had my mission call, and it was General Conference weekend. That's the twice a year church headquarters, all of the prophets and, all of the apostles and the prophet and general authorities speak. And I was sitting down on the couch at my mom's house. I remember it vividly. And I was taking notes like crazy. I had my notebook out. I probably had my scriptures out, and I was paying such good attention. And I was so excited to hear what these men mostly were going to say. And my mom, I think, got out the vacuum and was like vacuuming the carpet. And I said something to her. I said something like shamed her and basically said, you should be watching Conference. Why aren't you sitting down and watching Conference? Which is very ironic in retrospect and is why my mom likes to remind me of that moment. But I wish I could have just chilled out a little bit, or actually a lot bit. Someone wrote in and said, I brought pass-along cards to recess in 3rd grade to convert and teach the Hindu girl that moved to my school. Facepalm, facepalm. Oh man, I think that that's a very relatable sentiment. I actually just did an episode on the Patreon that I might reference a few times because this was coming up for me as I was reading through these submissions about the C word. Is Mormonism a cult or not? And I've been thinking a lot about cult-like symptoms of an organization, things about an organization that are culty, and then also how the organization of the church can have cult-like effects on people. And one of the huge things is this need, this deep, deep-seated drive to convert other people to the church, I think is quite cult-like, because the church, at least in my experience, and it sounds like from this person's experience as well, and many people I've spoken to, it doesn't just say, you should be happy you're part of the church. It pushes and pushes and pushes. You need to tell everybody about the church. It's not only a good thing to do, it's actually your duty to do so. You need to be being a missionary. And that kind of makes Mormons a little bit insufferable sometimes. And not everybody takes that to heart in the same way. But I think as someone in Provo, Utah, who was not surrounded by many non-Mormon people, whenever I was interacting, even as a kid, with someone that I knew wasn't Mormon, I felt like it was my duty to, in some way, try and teach them or show them or invite them with something related to the gospel. And I can see how this 3rd grader probably met this girl and realized they were of a different religion and just immediately saw that as an opportunity to share the gospel and give them a pass-along card, which is such a sweet inclination in one way as a child to share something with someone that's meaningful to you. But I can just see all of the things behind it, which is that this probably came from a sense of, this is what I'm supposed to do. And now I finally have an opportunity to do it because I'm meeting someone with a different religious background than me, and how sad that it has to be that way instead of, oh, what can I learn from this person and their unique experience and their unique religious beliefs, as opposed to how can I get this person to think and believe the way I do. Someone said, my husband didn't get a life insurance policy on me for years because my patriarchal blessing said I would live a long life free of illness. That's actually really funny. Taking a patriarchal blessing, that literally, that you wouldn't take out a life insurance policy because your patriarchal blessing says you will live a long life. I think this one also just goes to show how literally some of us took the church generally and these specific things about the church, and how now I feel like there's almost sort of a sense, since leaving the church, I get this feeling from a lot of current members of the church when I talk about the church that I just took it all too seriously or too literally. And if I talk about patriarchal blessings, for example, which are very much sold to a Mormon as a blessing that is going to tell you what happens in your life and the blessings you will get and the things that you should do. When I talk about that, I will often be met with, well, it's not that literal. I think most Mormons would say, well, you should have just taken out the life insurance policy. But wait, then what good is a patriarchal blessing if not to be taken as truth? You know? And so someone actually believing what is said in their patriarchal blessing and acting accordingly actually makes a lot of sense. But obviously, in retrospect, you can look back and be like, probably put a lot too much stock in that patriarchal blessing to fully not take out a life insurance policy. And it sounds like you have one now. So I'm glad that you left the church, if even for that. Someone says, I'm ex-Mormon, but a couple of years ago on Snapchat, a guy I used to know from school added me. We started talking and catching up like you normally would. He then started asking me for nudes, which is wild coming from a missionary, and I would never do that. I screenshotted his message and sent it to his bishop. He got sent back home from his mission. Smiley face. Okay, so it's sounding like she knew when this guy started Snapchatting her that he was currently on a mission, which you're not supposed to have Snapchat on a mission. Back in the day, the good old days, when I was on a mission, we didn't even have, well, actually, I did get an iPad. Later on in my mission, we were one of the pilot missions for iPads. I do know a lot of missionaries are now on social media. They do Facebook missionary work, et cetera, et cetera. I've seen some of them on Instagram. I'm not sure what the rules are. I can guess that Snapchat is not allowed, and asking for nudes, regardless, is very much not allowed on a mission. Kind of savage that you reported that missionary and got him sent home. Kind of savage. This one is so painful. In high school, I told a girl I would never date a bisexual person because, quote, they're 2 times as likely to cheat. Yikes. I've never heard that one. Surprise, after years of self-discovery, turns out I too am bisexual. I think about that comment frequently and really wish I had any contact with her to reach out and apologize. Note, regardless of my own sexuality, that comment was not at all appropriate or kind. Just ironic for me to have said looking back. I sometimes feel like, and maybe this is just, it is just an armchair expert theory, but I feel like sometimes the people who are most homophobic are sometimes the people who are wrestling or have an inkling or intuition perhaps about their own sexuality that they have not yet come to terms with or fully faced or accepted. And so the homophobia is just a projection. And I also think people can be homophobic no matter what. Don't get me wrong. These things are so tricky because, yes, that was not a nice thing to say. And I'm very glad that you've been able to see the error of your ways. It's hard to hold 2 things true at once in these instances, which I've definitely had to work through myself, which is I said and did not only haunting things as a Mormon, but things that actually had real life consequences. My Mormonism affected other people, and it affected other people in hurtful ways. And that's not okay. And that's something that I have taken accountability for as much as I can. I've apologized for, and I can hold that true while also holding true that I was under the influence of homophobic doctrines, of sexist doctrines, of doctrines about everyone outside of Mormonism being other, of people only being good people if they kept the commandments correctly, etc. And so I have compassion for my former self and all of our Mormon former selves, while also thinking that it's a really important thing to reckon with those things that we said and did. I think that that's a huge, important part of a faith deconstruction is not only deconstructing, stepping away, but also realizing that the certain things at least, and not like we were all terrible people when we were in the church. I don't think that's true either. But I do think it's important to take accountability and reckon with those things. It's sort of the same thing as when people leave the church and then they think that they've somehow left all of the misogyny and the homophobia and the transphobia and the racism just completely behind them. And unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And I still have massive amounts of work to do in deprogramming all of that, which also a lot of that comes from society generally. But I do think that having that awareness, that self-awareness, and moving through it is really important. And I don't think we need to feel guilt or shame, but I do think we need to feel the repercussions of that and be willing to do the work to move beyond that. So I feel you. I think a big thing that comes up for me in feeling haunted around all of this is something I've spoken about at length before. My friend Tanner came out as gay, and there were a lot of things that I said to him that in retrospect are incredibly icky. I actually did an episode with Tanner that I can link in the show notes, and I'm trying to remember when I've just talked about it here and there, but the episode covers it. And I've been grateful for the opportunity to apologize to Tanner and to make amends as best I can, because I was not in my right mind. I don't think I was as connected to my own compassion as I wish I were because of Mormonism, but that doesn't mean I didn't really hurt him by certain things I said or did. And one of the times, while we're getting it all out there, was Tanner actually visited me when I was living in San Francisco and he was in LA, and he was still coming to terms with church stuff. He was out as gay and he was trying to figure out where he stood with church stuff. Basically, we were in the park one day and we were kind of arguing about things, and I basically bore my testimony to him. And what I said was, I believe that it's all going to be worked out and everything's going to be okay in the end. But I was still Mormon. So I was essentially saying, I believe I can still be Mormon and you can go do whatever you want to do. And in the end, it will all work out. But for me as a straight person to kind of be saying that as a testimony to my gay best friend was just not okay. And I feel really badly about it still. And I'm glad I could apologize, but I wish I never said it, regardless of what my faith status was. Okay, next submission. I was very willing and almost eager to die for the Lord because it would be so noble and an instant pass to the celestial kingdom. I also had such depression, anxiety, and scrupulosity thanks to the church that I quite literally wanted to die because I knew that life would be better. We were taught that life after this was so much happier, so I would hope to be taken so I could just get to that happy part and finally feel free. Now that I'm out and my mental health has dramatically improved because I freed myself and I want to live, it's awesome. So proud of you. The reason I shared that one is because that is really scary. That I've heard that from many people, especially people with scrupulosity, that believed wholeheartedly it would be better to die, especially before the age of 8, before the age of accountability and baptism, because then they wouldn't have the opportunity to sin and they could just go live with God again someday. And I think it shows the underbelly of a belief in a heaven and afterlife, because when you're taught, especially as a kid, the afterlife is so amazing and perfect and you'll be with God and with your family, that's confusing because you feel like living on earth and making mistakes can prevent you from getting to that lovely, wonderful place. So it makes sense that a developing mind could get really confused and just think it would be better to die before having the chance to ruin that possibility. And I've heard from a lot of you about this because Ashley Buckner and I were talking about baptism and how it's not developmentally appropriate. And I had a lot of people DMing me and commenting this same sentiment, that they wished as a kid that they would die before baptism. And that's just very much not okay, very scary. And this is very much less so something scary that that person did and something very scary that the church imposed on them and a very scary situation that the church put them in. And fuck the church for that. Wouldn't be a girls' camp episode without a fuck the church. No, I don't usually say that, but very much felt called for after that. Next one. I didn't let one of our best friends move in with us because I found out she was drinking. Cry face, cry face, cry face, cry face. I've apologized so many times, but I can't believe I did that to her. Also, sadly, relatable. The things we did to ostracize people who were not keeping the Mormon commandments and doing the Mormon things. I bet most of us have some sort of similar circumstance where we felt like we were protecting ourselves and our Mormonism by just not being inclusive and loving to people who were not doing the Mormon thing. And that is really sad. And I'm glad you could apologize, and all the same things are applicable that I said before, holding that grace and understanding that we're doing it very differently is really important, but really sad to have done anything like that towards a friend. And again, I can relate. Next one. I got really, really good at baptizing people into a religion that they are still committed to and have even gone on missions now themselves. I really feel for people who went on missions and converted people to the church and then left the church. And now they have these people that they brought to the church through their own efforts, through the things they taught and shared. And what do you do now? Do you try and tell them? Do you try and deconvert them? That would be so complicated. It is one of the blessings of serving a mission in Germany, which is that even though I did baptize some people, I really don't think any of them are still active in any capacity. And so that gives me some relief around this thing because, yeah, that would just be really strange. And, these people, not to pull a Mormon phrase on you, but it's not like you held a gun to their head. I do think that some missionary work can be highly manipulative and coercive. So I think there is that element of it, but I also think, people do have the choice. You presented them with some information, maybe not all the information, actually certainly not all the information, but it was a choice they made for themselves, and maybe it's serving them in some ways. It's maybe beneficial for certain people in certain circumstances. I think it is. So I don't know. Don't beat yourself up too much, but that would be a trip to see someone you brought to the church now out teaching other people about the church. I'm also working with this guy. I just started working with him on YouTube stuff. We're trying to amp up my YouTube presence for any people who like YouTube out there. And he actually worked for the church for a long time doing marketing and social media stuff, I believe. And so now he offers initial consultations with people doing ex-Mormon content for free because he's like trying to undo the marketing he did for the church, which I think is kind of sweet. Next one. I told the young women as their 23-year-old young women's president that it was just as much their sin as the boys' sin if their immodest dress is creating impure thoughts in the boys' heads. That was something I remembered learning at EFY as a youth. I wish I could find each of those young women to apologize. That one gets me at my core because I think that as women, I'll just be speaking about women specifically. I think this happens in other ways too. But it's particularly sad when women perpetuate a misogynist system. And it happens. I did it. I did it my whole time as a Mormon. It's kind of inevitable in a lot of ways. Even though I started to push back and I was pushing back more and more, you are still within a patriarchal misogynist system. You are kind of inevitably perpetuating some of those messages. And it's really sad to think about now something that I care so much about, empowering women and pushing back against purity culture, modesty culture, all of those things. I know that I also contributed to sharing that with youth and sharing that with peers. And it's a really sad thing to sit with. But it's also wonderful to look back and realize that we saw the error of our ways. And also to this person's point, she was just saying what she was taught as a youth. And just that makes sense. She was taught something and she was continuing to teach something. And I really hope that these types of things are being taught less and less in the Mormon church. There are people in my life who are LDS, and I know that they feel much more similarly to me about things like modesty culture and purity culture than to some of the things that the church still teaches. So I know that they're out there in the young women, in the Relief Society, in leadership positions, pushing back on those things. And that makes me really hopeful that there is at least some progress and change in these areas. I think, the church just very slowly starts to catch up. And I hope that that's happening because that's a crazy thing to tell young women. And I think that that would be less likely to happen right now, but maybe not. I don't know. Maybe I'm being optimistic. Any of you physically in, mentally out Mormons, let me know if that kind of thing is still being taught that explicitly. My husband and I dated when we were teenagers. We were kissing in the car as teenagers do, and I asked him if he wanted to touch my boobs, over my clothes, obviously. This man, dead ass, tells me after a long pause, I would, but I have to pass the sacrament with these hands. Thankfully, we have both come a long way since then and are happily ex-Mormon. You can't touch a woman's breasts on a Saturday night and then pass the sacrament with those very hands on a Sunday morning, young men. That definitely sounds like something that was taught to him in some scary young men's lecture, but it's kind of hilarious that he was thinking that way. And wow, let's talk about some discipline. When offered to touch a woman's breasts and he simply says, can't do it. Got to pass the sacrament tomorrow or on Sunday. I actually forgot to mention something special and exciting that's happening this month, this November, is I'm getting new boobs, everyone. I have officially scheduled my breast augmentation surgery. It's towards the end of the month. I'm so thrilled. I've talked about this here and there, and I've had people ask questions. I think I'm going to do a full Patreon rundown on it, just because it's a little bit more of a private subject, but maybe I'll touch on it next month after the boobs are implanted. But I've been joking, I'm getting them done before Thanksgiving, and I've been joking. We do go around the room and say what we're thankful for on my mom's side, who are a bit more conservative, I'll say. And I hope that I can build up the courage. I think it'd be so funny for me to say I'm grateful for my new boobs, but I probably won't be brave enough. And I don't know if I'll be up for doing that based on how I recover from surgery, but I'll let you know. I eloped 14 days after getting home from my mission with an elder I met on my mission and didn't tell anyone. The marriage lasted 2 years, and now I am a happily divorced ex-Mormon, LMAO. 14 days might be the winner. That might be the winner of home from a mission to getting married. Wait, remember that story? OGs will remember this story. This was from, it might have been the first summer after I had started the podcast. But there's a story, it was in the news. 4 siblings got married on the same day. They did like a joint family wedding. And I want to say one of them was a return missionary of a week or something like that. So that one might beat out the 14 days. But the 14 days is pretty high up there. That's pretty crazy to still be basically a missionary, not have any time to readjust to the real world, and not only get married, but marry someone that you met in the mission setting. That's pretty crazy. But it sounds like you're very happy now. Divorced, ex-Mormon, very happy for you. A lot of people wrote in about how quickly they got married, the age they got married, and how haunting that is now. Yup, it's pretty haunting. I used to tell my story about how quickly Bentley and I met, got engaged, got married, which if you need a refresher, he wrote me on my mission. We wrote for 3 months. I saw him the day after I got home from my mission, which was December 13th. We were engaged by February 13th, 2 months, and then married 3 months after that, May 5th. So from getting off the plane December 13th, not having interacted in person at all, we were married by May 5th. And I don't know, there's part of me, I mean, it's haunting, don't get me wrong. It's spooky and it's scary and it's a horror story. No, it's not, but it's crazy. But there's another part of me that thinks it's all part of the lore. It's all part of the plot. And I can't change it now. And here we are 8 years later. We're happy. And so, it is what it is. And it's kind of a fun party trick to have up my sleeve when I'm around Never Mormons, especially. But I do feel like I thought that was so crazy. It is. But a lot of y'all have me beat big time. And 14 days definitely has me beat, especially, again, because it's to another missionary. Someone wrote in and said simply, the scariest thing they ever did as a Mormon was marry another Mormon, with a dismayed emoji. This was another thing that I was thinking of around that cult episode I was talking about, and just thinking about how insular the Mormon world tends to be. And one of the metrics of cults, according to sociologists, I think, is the size of an organization. And the smaller, usually the more cult-like, which is one of the reasons why some academics don't consider Mormonism a cult, is because it's quite large and it's global. But I do think that there's something to be said about the fact that it is so insular, especially when it comes to marriage. I think, people work with people who aren't Mormon and they're friends with people who aren't Mormon within some capacity. But you are very much encouraged to marry within the religion, because if you're not marrying another Mormon, you can't get married in the temple. And so there's a huge incentive to marry someone who is an active Mormon. And I was talking about this with a friend because they served a mission in London, and they were talking about some weird inner ward dynamics with affairs or something. And we ended up talking about how it's really interesting in European places where the church is so small compared to the population. It's a very small percentage. And yet most members are still marrying other members. And so they have a really small dating pool and marriage pool because they really want to marry another Mormon. And there often ends up being situations where the families are just really close, not like it's incestuous, but it's like it's just a very small community. And then there's a lot of marrying within the community. And that feels like a bit of a cult red flag to me. The fact that people are strongly encouraged, even if they're living in a place where there's not a lot of members, to only marry other members and then have Mormon kids, etc. Just something to think about. Just something to noodle on. Next one. In the beginning of 2020, I broke off my friendship with a guy because we started having feelings for each other. My mom told me I should because it's not like I could marry him since he wasn't Mormon. Oh my gosh, I was just talking about that. I didn't know this was next. Later that year, I deconstructed, almost immediately started dating him again, and we are getting married next year. It's scary to think I could have missed out on finding and marrying my person. Wow, that proved my point really, really well. Yes, how crazy that you could miss out on being with your soulmate. I don't even really believe in soulmates, but someone you love and want to spend your life with just because their religious beliefs weren't Mormon. That's not great, and very happy that you didn't miss out on that and that you were able to deconstruct. I also feel like for a lot of people, not a lot, but I think it happens where people meet a never Mormon and they fall in love, and then being that close to someone who isn't Mormon pretty quickly unravels the otherness that Mormonism tried to instill in us about other people who weren't Mormon. This also kind of happens on a mission, which is interesting because I think missions are primarily to get young Mormons to see everyone else as other, because you're treated really poorly oftentimes because you're doing something annoying to people. It's very much, teaching you to see other Mormons as the only safe community and everyone else as not that way. So you're less likely to leave. However, you are also being exposed to so many other people that you maybe wouldn't be otherwise, and you're talking to them about religion and their closely held values and beliefs, and that can start to really challenge what you've been taught, because you realize, wait, these people are really lovely people and they seem to be really good people too. And so it can kind of do both things at once. Next one. Quote, if a girl is dressed immodestly on a date, it makes me uncomfortable because I don't know where she wants me to look. This was my comment during a Sunday school class at a BYU singles ward, in public with women in the room. I now live by the beach and could not care less about what people do or do not wear. Moments like that still haunt the back of my brain and make me want to curl into a ball and not exist. LOL. You know what? This one is actually very hopeful to me because of what I was talking about earlier, where yes, it's one thing to have said that and leave. It's another thing to have said that and leave and realize how much went into saying that and how it affected the women in the room. And I actually get the sense from this person who wrote in, who I'm assuming is male because of the way it was all framed, they are probably so much more sensitive now to the way that they speak about women and their bodies and their clothing, et cetera, because they've really reckoned with, that was really shitty that I said that and that I thought that. I've also been thinking, reading through these, how Mormon so many of us were, and how silly it is that ex-Mormons are always told, well, you weren't really committed to the church or you weren't really devout, because if you were, you wouldn't have left and you wouldn't now be critiquing the church. And oftentimes, the most vocal ex-Mormons or the people who have the most feelings about the whole thing are the ones of us who were doing and saying all the Mormon things. We were so bought in. We did it. We lived it. We loved it. What's that General Conference quote? Live it, love it. Oh man, you're probably screaming at your screens or radios right now. There's some quote that a woman actually gave at General Conference. I live it. I love it. I'm sorry. I'm going to look it up. Oh, okay. I found it. Also, I looked up, what's the Mormon quote? I live it. I love it. But it popped right up. Thank you, Google. The quote is, I know it. I live it. I love it. Someone said that in General Conference, and then there were t-shirts and whatever. And that was us. We knew it. We lived it. We loved it. And now we got a lot of thoughts about it, because the more we knew, lived, and loved it, oftentimes, the more there is to unpack on the other side. When people left the church, I would say to myself and others, why would they not just keep doing everything the Mormon way, just in case it is true, since the consequences are so great? Welp, here I am. I forgot about this logic. The logic is, even if you didn't believe the church was true, or you weren't sure, would it not be better to just live life the Mormon way, just in case, when you die, Mormonism is true? And then you could say, well, even if I didn't know for sure, I at least kept all the commandments and did all the things so that my eternal salvation was never at stake. As if living the Mormon way is just some simple, easy thing to do, especially for people who are queer or all the things. Also, once you just don't believe it anymore, then you just really don't believe it. Like, I don't feel any need to have that backup safety plan of keeping the Mormon commandments just in case Mormonism is true, because I also don't think of all the religions and philosophies of the meaning of life, why would Mormonism be the right one? I would rather choose a religion that's easier and better and lends itself to a happier lifestyle than the Mormon one. And living the Mormon way is pretty hard. It demands a lot from you. There's a lot of things you miss out on. And call me hedonistic. Not sure why that word came to mind. Not even completely sure what that means. But I think that living a life where you get to drink alcohol, for example, it's not like alcohol is my end all be all, but I'm really glad I've been able to have alcohol in the one life I've been given. I'm really glad I've been able to try weed. I'm really glad I get to dress comfortably. I'm really glad that I've gotten a lot of time back in my life by not doing all the callings and all the things. Like, my life has significantly improved. And I'm not just saying that. Genuinely, I believe that and I feel that. The quality of my life has improved massively by leaving the Mormon church. And there was a period of time when I first left the Mormon church where I told myself, I'm not going to do anything not Mormon, because that's not why I left. I didn't leave to drink alcohol. I didn't leave to drink coffee, which is still true. That's not why I left. However, I'm so glad I get to live a life on my terms now, and I really love my life a lot more when I get to make the rules and not the Mormon church. Amen. I gave up my home country to come to, quote, Zion, all to find out it was all a lie. That one is really, really sad and really opened up my perspective. I hadn't thought about this. For context, Zion is Utah. And the church has sort of stopped, not stopped completely, but has softened or let up on this rhetoric. But for a long time, they were telling anyone who joined the church, who converted to the church, you should try and move to Utah, essentially, which is wild as it sounds. And even now, I don't feel like that's the dominant messaging, but a lot of people who join the church, who convert, who live in other countries, they want to come and be in Zion around the other Mormons. It makes sense. And that is so devastating, to give up your life, your culture, not give up your culture, but living amongst your culture, to come to Utah, live in, quote, Zion, and then realize that it was all a lie. That I just can't imagine. how much different a deconstruction could be and how much more anger there would be and how much more you adjusted your entire life for something. So I'm so sorry that you experienced that. And I hope if it's your desire to go back to your home country that you can make it there. I know that's so much easier said than done, but just sending a lot of sympathy. I think back to the times on my Mormon mission where I sat in people's dilapidated homes, barely struggling to survive as it was, looking them in the face and telling them to pay 10% of their income to the church. God, I feel icky and gross just thinking about it. Woof. Didn't think about that one. But yeah, that's haunting. To tell people who can barely afford to live that they do need to give 10% of their income to the church, and then probably later finding out how massively wealthy the church is. I knew the church had a lot of money, but I didn't know how much. And then, of course, none of us knew until the whistleblower thing when we found out the church has upwards of $100 billion. And then asking people who are scraping by to pay their money to that church is quite bad. When my friend told me he was gay and struggling with the church, I likened it to me liking the smell of coffee, but as long as I don't drink it, then I wouldn't be sinning. I am horrified that I ever thought that was a helpful way to support a friend coming out, and I really believed it was that simple for someone who is LGBTQ+. I don't know where he is now, but I hope one day I get to sincerely apologize. Maybe this friend is listening and can hear your apology here. That's bad. That's really bad. There's a lot of that sort of logic that was taught to us in order to, again, I think distance us from our own love and compassion, because we felt like that wasn't right to disallow queer people from living an authentic life. And in order to make it make sense in our own brains, we had to come up with shit like this to be like, well, it's actually not so different. I remember doing that for a period of time, thinking, well, it's not so different from any other trial or from any other challenge in this life. And people still say that to this day, which is so obviously wrong. But I know where that's coming from. It's coming from a place of trying to solve this massive dissonance, and what a relief it is to not have to do that and to just get to actually love and embrace people and accept people. It's such a relief. It genuinely feels like a relief after so long of trying to justify simply not doing that. Sorry, Dad and Mom and siblings, you can't come to my wedding ceremony because you aren't Mormon. See you on the outside. I was a convert to the church, and this literally breaks my heart. We left the church about a year ago, and my dad passed recently. I'm mourning everything he missed because the church took up so much of my life and took away precious things from my immediate family to experience because they weren't LDS. Sorry to bring up the C word again, but I mean, I'm just reading these experiences. But in what other scenario does your immediate family, your entire immediate family, not get to witness you be married? In what other scenario? That's a huge deal. That sucks really bad for you, for your family. Now that your dad has passed, I can imagine that adds to the grief. That just really, really sucks. And I'm so sorry that that's what you thought you needed to do. That's another thing Ashley said, which take a shot every time I reference the Ashley Buckner episode. It was just so phenomenal to me. So life-changing for me. But she said of us as Mormons, of people in the Mormon church, we were just doing what we felt like we needed to do to be safe. And I think this resonates for that. In order to give yourself that compassion, you were doing what you thought you had to do. And it sucks to realize I never had to do that anyway. But under those circumstances, you were doing your best. And I'm so sorry. I hope you can sit with that grief and then move through it. And I'm just really sorry. I converted my best friend to Mormonism and then I left the church. LOL. Yes, she's still Mormon. Uh-oh. Can you get her out? If you converted her to Mormonism, I feel like deconverting her or getting her out of Mormonism might be less of a hard sell. I don't know. Not really your place. Again, I know it never works. I actually feel like it works sometimes even worse. It works less well. what am I trying to say? I feel like sometimes converting people to Mormonism works better than deconverting people, more so because once people are part of that Mormon framework, any amount of pressure or anything trying to coax people out is so immediately interpreted as anti-Mormon, evil, et cetera, that it just doesn't work before it even begins. But girl, I hope you can get her out. Someone says, I told my husband that if he left the church, I would divorce him. Skull. Oh, I know so many people, not so many. I know many people, and I'm sure there are so many people who got divorced because of faith differences, because one partner decided to leave the church, and so bye-bye. Because what Mormons are taught is that marriage is, in my opinion, less about the love between partners and more about the joint commitment to Mormon God. We were taught about marriage as a triangle where there's you, there's your partner, and then the middle point of the triangle is God. God is such a pivotal part of a relationship that you can see if someone's partner left the church, it's like, well, what's the relationship then? The relationship is not worth it. It's nothing. And there's plenty of years of my marriage where I thought the same way. I don't know if I ever said it, and I never had to face it, and I didn't think it would happen. But I wouldn't doubt that this would be my mentality. Really scary. Maybe if I sing it instead of just saying it for the millionth time, it'll ring a little differently. Okay, last one. I still regret telling many people I taught on my mission that they were praying the quote wrong way. It was something we felt pressured to do as missionaries, but now I can't believe the audacity. I actually wrote an essay while I was at BYU, and I was still Mormon, but I was, sorry if you're watching on YouTube, there we go, trying to lock the iPad. I was still Mormon, but I was beginning to deconstruct, and I wrote this essay basically reckoning with that same guilt of going out as a 19-year-old and telling people that what they believed was wrong, that the way they were praying, which is such a personal and intimate practice, was wrong. Who the fuck was I as a 19-year-old to be going out, knocking on people's doors and being like, let me tell you what you're doing wrong and let me tell you what's right? It's really wild to think that I did that. And maybe I'll read this essay as part of an episode sometime, maybe on the Patreon. I don't know. But it's been interesting to read that essay back. I also talk about tarot cards and how when I first met my sister-in-law, we were talking about astrology, and you can just see me trying to work through these ideas of the exclusivity of Mormonism and how it thinks it has all the truth, and me just seeing so much of the truth in other ways and just feeling uncomfortable about the Mormon narrative. And I actually think I use an analogy. Oh, well, I was talking about how as a missionary, one of the things I would teach people is that they had pieces of truth. That because Jesus was on earth, after Jesus died, there was a great apostasy. And during that time, the fullness of the truth was lost, but there were small pieces of the truth. And so I would basically tell people, like a pat on the back, well, you have some truth. That's nice, but you don't have the whole truth, the fullness of the truth. And that's just a shitty thing to tell people, that their truth, their beliefs are just a little bit right, but not completely right. And again, not okay to tell anyone ever, but the audacity as a 19-year-old is especially troublesome. And now I'm thinking about the whole mission age thing and how maybe you can only get 19-year-olds to have that sort of lack of self-awareness and that sort of limited worldview that you can even go out and tell people that. Not that Mormons of all ages don't continue to do that, and people of all religions and all ages, or many of them. But, you know, it's kind of a human instinct to just believe your thing is the true thing, and then you're being told that. Another funny thing about that essay is when the Ward Radio episode, when they were doing a snark episode about me, there was a woman who was in my class that I had written that essay in. It was a creative writing class at BYU. And she commented on the Ward Radio thing, and she said, this chick, oh, she was also on my mission. never got good vibes from her and checks out based on this comment. But she basically said, this chick was in my mission, and then we had a class together at BYU, and she wrote an essay about how she left the church because of tarot cards. So that was her level of critical and nuanced thinking, is that when she heard that essay about me exploring and working through this very difficult thing, she was like, oh, bitch left the church because of tarot cards, which very valid reason to leave the church, by the way, but very much not the reason I left. But I don't think that, I almost wanted to say her name, Sister So-and-so would really understand. And that's okay too. Thank you so much for writing in. This was a very highly responded to prompt. I had a blast, honestly, reading through all of these, just feeling like, man, we really lived very similar stories in so many ways. And there's a comfort in that. So thank you for writing in. Thank you for being here. Thanks for being a camper. You can follow along on Instagram at Girls Camp Podcast, on YouTube at Girls Camp Podcast, or on TikTok at Haley Rawl. I cannot wait to chat with you next week. Thanks for joining. Bye.
GIRLSCAMP, it's Girls Camp.
This has been a 58 Ember production. For more shows, please visit the 58 Ember channel, 58ember.com, or find us at 58 Ember Media on socials.